Good morning and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, this is going to be the second video in a series of videos that I'm doing where we take a deeper look at Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, and I ask the admittingly rhetorical question of why is it still so playable? Now, in response to my first video on this subject and this question, I've received, a number of responses that, that I kind of expected and a few that I wasn't quite expecting. But for the most part, the consensus was that of course the game is so playable. And I wanted to get into the reason, and I agree with that, and I wanted to get into the reason of why I believe that this game is so, playable in this edition. And that is because there's a perception that I believe that's out there is that new editions come out in order to fix something in the older edition, or the new editions are produced because they're supposedly a better version of the game. And I don't believe either of those is always the case. Certain editions are not better than their previous ones. And within Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, we can obviously debate that. But there are certain editions, and I'm not going to slam any edition, specifically, but there's at least one edition that's really considered not to be an improvement at all. And I just wanted to delve into that question and take a better look at first edition and see why it is still so playable, because it is still a very popular edition of this game. Huge community still plays this game, or this edition, I should say. And, for the most part, that's what I wanted to take a look at. So, once again, I have my hard copy here, and I was debating whether or not to, look at it, page through, or actually go to just the PDF and go through it. In that sense, I might do a little bit of both. So in the comments section, you point out your preference if you like to see it, one way or the other way, or if you like going back and forth, between the PDF and the actual hard copy. So without further ado, I am going to shift to the PDF at this point. And so here we go. Now, both my physical copy and the PDF, even though the cover is different, I have the second cover of the Players Handbook. The both are the 1978 editions of the game, and both were, or this book, I should say, and both are sixth printing January 1980. So, I'm personally, I struggle to remember because it was back so long ago. I think it was around 1980 that my particular player group shifted from playing Dungeons and Dragons to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So, it was pretty much, from that point on, from 79 or 80 going forward until about 87, we played just this for Dungeons and Dragons. I want to focus some time on the foreword because I think the foreword is really important here. And I am actually going to read through a good portion of it, because once again, I think it's really important to see the thinking that went behind creating these editions, and really how Gary Gygax looked at the game. All right, so we're going to begin with the foreword here. Players, and more players. That's what comprises the D&D phenomenon. And phenomenal is what it is, as the audience of this granddaddy of all role-playing games continues to expand. D&D players, happily, come in all shapes and sizes, and even a fair number of women are counted among those who regularly play the game, making Dungeons & Dragons somewhat special in this regard. This widespread appeal cuts across many boundaries of interest and background, which means that D&D players are marked by a wide range of diversity. In fact, one could easily use the analogy that there are as many types of D&D players as there are D&D monsters. After that, draw your own conclusions. There are unquestionably fast players, slow players, clever players, foolish players, cautious players, reckless players, generous players, greedy players, friendly players, and obnoxious players. As diverse as this melange of enthusiasts is, they all seem to share one commonality: a real love for Dungeons and Dragons, and a devotion that few other games can claim. This remarkable loyalty is a great factor in the game's explosion of popularity, and Dungeons and Dragons has become a gaming cult as avid D&Ders have ceaselessly spread the gospel, enrolling new players and expanding groups which just seem to grow and grow. I want to take a quick shift over to here. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and Dungeons & Dragons in general has always been diverse. That is not something new that has been suddenly created or created just within the last 5 years. It's not something that Wizards of the Coast introduced to Dungeons & Dragons. There it is in black and white, early as 1978. Here in this edition of the game, Gary Gygax is claiming it. He's putting it out there. These are his observations of the player base at the time. Diversity has always been there. All right, so I'm going to go back to our PDF. If you're reading this, and I'm back here in the next paragraph. If you're reading this, then you are a D&D player, and this book is for you. This is the second release of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons series, and is designed to be a player's book in every respect, giving you all the background you require on the game system as well as the information you'll need to go adventuring. Although this book does not stand alone in terms of supplying all information needed to undertake a campaign, it will complete the other two parts of the whole: the previously released Monster Manual and the upcoming Dungeon Master's Guide, to provide the entirety of what will be Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, along with a greatly expanded version of Gods, Demigods, and Heroes, which will follow. The sheer bulk of this book may seem considerable, and it is, of course, but there are many things not included. These things, such as details of the combat tables or, for instance, are those parts of the game that rightly fall outside the realm of player reference and thus are included instead in the more voluminous Dungeon Master's Guide. As the author points out, this bit of the unknown outside of the player's normal reach will make the game much more interesting and challenging. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is a game that is demanding for players and dungeon masters alike, but the rewards in the term of enjoyment are vast. This is nothing quite like a successful D&D campaign, and I'm sorry, I lost my spot. And its success is based upon the efforts of all participants. The dungeon master is pivotal, of course, but the players are just as important, for there are primary actors and actresses in the fascinating drama which unfolds before them. For that reason, their outlook and their conduct will greatly affect the flavor and tempo of the campaign. Accordingly, they should do their best to further the success of the entire undertaking. This is often no more than a matter of simple etiquette, and the following of a few simple guidelines will suffice to make the game experience more fun for everyone. Okay. Oh, it froze a bit there. Let's see. So be organized, player, necessary information, cooperate with the dungeon master and respect his decisions. If you disagree, present your viewpoint with deference to his position as game moderator. Be prepared to accept his decision as final, and remember that not everything in the game will always go your way. That's basically rule 0 in that second bullet. Cooperate with other players and respect their right to participate. Encourage new and novice players by making suggestions and allowing them to make decisions on courses of action rather than dictating their responses. If you are unable to participate in an adventure, give another player and the DM some concrete guidelines. If your character is going to be included in the adventure group, be prepared to accept the consequences, good or bad in any case. Get in the spirit of the game. Use your persona to play with a special personality all its own. Interact with other player characters and non-player characters to give the game campaign a unique flavor and life. Above all, let yourself go and enjoy. All right, and that's written by Mike Carr. So now we're going to get into the preface here. And I'm just going to skim over this as far as the thought process. It goes into the tables and charts. The latter part, I project the approach at no small amount of trepidation. All right, so in this latter part of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons project, I approached with no small amount of trepidation. After all, the game's major appeal is to those persons with unusually active imagination and superior active intellect. A very demanding audience indeed. Furthermore, a great majority of readers master their own dungeons and are necessarily creative. The most critical audience of all. Authoring these works means that, in a way, I have set myself up as final arbiter of fantasy role-playing in the minds of the majority of D&D adventurers. Well, so be it. I rationalize. Who better than the individual responsible for it all as creator of the fantasy supplement and chainmail, the progenitor of D&D, and as the first proponent of fantasy gaming and the principal in TSR, the company one thinks of when fantasy games are mentioned. The credit and the blame rests ultimately here. Some last authority must be established for very good reason. All right. And he goes further on into explaining that Dungeons and Dragons, especially Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, is is a crunchy game. There are rules in here, some of which are necessary to follow. Others are, are optional. But there's, you know, Gary Gygax really does give a lot of credit to the players, and in particular dungeon masters who write their own content, in that everyone is pretty much expected to be you know a good reader. They're expected to be good in mathematics, because there is a lot of both in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So it is important to keep in mind that I'm down here into this paragraph. I don't know if you could see my cursor. I'll highlight it so you can see where I'm at. It is important to keep in mind that after all is said and done, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is a game. Because it is a game, certain things which seem unrealistic or simply unnecessary are integral to the system. Classes have restrictions in order to give a varied and unique approach to each class when they play, as well as to provide play balance. Races are given advantages or limits mainly because the whole character of the game would be drastically altered if it were otherwise. Everything in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons system has a purpose. Most of what it is found herein is essential to the campaign, and those sections which are not, such as subclasses of characters, psionics, and similar material, are clearly labeled as optional inclusions. And then Gary Gygax goes on to say, about the presentation of the work and the books and such, and then a long list of special thanks to. Let me switch once again. I have several things going on here at the same time, and so it's going to create a tiny bit of lag. There we go. That is just the opening, and the preface, and you're already seeing it laid out, the purpose of this series of books, the acceptance that certain rules are kind of necessary in order to play this game the way it was designed, and those character classes and racial differences are integral to the game being playable. That is very different than what we're hearing today, as a concept where those differences are, potentially even unnecessary or detrimental to the playing. I'm trying to fix something on my screen here. So now we're going to start getting into the actual sections of the book, and I will only skim through it and just highlight certain things that jump out as I'm going through, just as you might go through as you're turning through this edition for the first time yourself. So back to the PDF. Yeah, and everything is kind of slowing down. So they go into the introduction of the game. And actually, let me go back to the table of contents here, and I will zoom in. Maybe one more time. So here we have the, yeah, let's actually get to the table of contents. So creating player characters, you'll have your character abilities, and these are the 6 standard abilities that character attributes that you've seen probably 1,000 times. For OSR games, if they emulate this here system, that is what makes them OSR, is that they do have these same basic 6 characteristics. You have the character races. Now, if you're familiar with, if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, some of these, like dwarves and elves and halflings, were classes as well. So race and class were melded together. Here, with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you have a separation of that. So a separation of race from class. So now you could be a dwarven cleric, or an elven fighter, or you could be a halfling magic user. So those things were, separated, and now you can have a different race and class. And it's in that combination that you start to get some variance, and you get some you get some meaningful choices now between, well, I'm not just playing the class that I want to play, but now I have to decide which race do I want to play combined up with that. And they don't always make the best mix, and that's okay. Could you be a half-orc magic user? Sure, you could be a half-orc magic user. Is it the best race-class combination based on the attributes and the modifiers and restrictions? No, it may not be the best combination, but if that's the character that you want to play, then that's actually more important than having that best synergy of race and class. All right, because this is about playing a character that you want to play. And they don't always have to be the best combination. Sometimes it's more enjoyable to play something that is not optimized for success. And I'm not saying that they're created to create an automatic failure either, but they are interesting choices to be made. We go to the classes, and you have cleric and druid. You have fighter, which is further broken down into paladin and ranger. You have the magic user illusionist. You have the thief assassin. You have the monk. All right. You have multi-class characters. You can have rules for characters with 2 classes, alignment, hit points, and such. So we're going to take a look at some of these character classes now. Actually, I believe the races come up first. So here's your attributes: strength, obviously, and yes, they do have. Here's one that's going to bring up several controversies. All right, so I will actually go through this here. And it's not so much where you get to the lower end of these. Although the minimum strength for a dwarf character is an 8. The minimum strength for a gnome, half-orc, or halfling is a 6. At a 5 strength, you could only be a magic user. All right, so the class minimums for all other classes is a 6. We go on. Our minimum strength for a fighter is a 9. Minimum strength for an assassin or paladin character is a 12. 13 is the minimum for a ranger character. 14 is the maximum possible strength for a female halfling character. Maximum strength possible for a female gnome character is a 15. Minimum strength for a monk is also a 15. Maximum possible for a female elf character is a 16. Maximum strength possible for a female dwarf or female half-elf or male halfling character is a 17. An 18 is the maximum strength possible for all 9 fighter characters. So all fighter characters, that means a fighter, a paladin, or a ranger, they can now start going into the 100. So the 18-100 range. An 1850 is the maximum possible strength for a female human or male gnome character. An 1875 is the maximum possible strength for a male elf or a female half-orc character. An 1890 is the maximum strength possible for a male half-elf character. An 1899 is the maximum strength possible for a male dwarf or a male half-orc character. And 18-100 is the maximum human strength. So you can see that there are racial limitations. There are also racial minimums. There are gender-based limitations or minimums, and also gender-based maximums. Now, I know this is very controversial in today's thinking of it, but these are based on the ideas that certain races are stronger, certain races, and you'll get into the same thing with intelligence-wise, where certain races are smarter or not overall as smart. This doesn't mean that there cannot be some exception out there. They're just talking about the averages. The female strength limitations are based on the science of the day when this was written, and I don't think necessarily the science has really changed when you're talking about averages. That human male upper body strength is typically higher than that on average than human female upper body strength. And that's solely where they're coming from with this distinction in the change. Yes, it creates a more crunchier system, as far as having those differences built in to it, but they felt that there was a genuine rationale behind it. Intelligence, I won't go through the whole thing like I did before, but you can see that there are mostly class-based minimums and maximums. Where you have minimums is with elves. You have more minimums for racial groups than you do maximums. The only group that is the maximum for intelligence is at 17 is the maximum intelligence for a half-orc. All right, but the rest are minimum settings for intelligence. Wisdom, taking a real quick glance, maximum wisdom for a half-orc is 14. All right. Dexterity, halflings I was expecting would have a minimum dexterity of an 8. So that means that regardless of your rolls, your attribute rolls in the beginning, and we didn't get through through actually rolling attributes yet. If you want to play a halfling character and you don't have enough scores to have that minimum, or rolls, I should say, results to have that minimum, then you're going to get set at that minimum. Although in most cases you're going to have some roll that is above an 8 when you're rolling, 3d6. So character races, and then they go through the character races with class limitations. So, and I said earlier, a dwarf, a dwarf could be a cleric, but you know, dwarves could not be clerics, so you don't have dwarven clerics here. So racial stock of character. Dwarves could be fighters. They could be thieves and assassins. They could not be any of these other classes. Elves uh, could not be clerics again. They could be fighters. They could be magic users. They could be thieves. They could be assassins. Uh, Humans could be everything. So again, they have limitations based on you could be a half-orc cleric, and they have an asterisk here. A no indicates that the race cannot become the character class in question. A yes indicates that they're able to become the character in question. And the asterisk, I'm trying to see what the asterisk stands for. Asterisk or a cleric can be true neutral unless the cleric subclass. Okay, so so that's what the asterisk there is for. All right, so here's just a better reflection of the minimums and maximums of each of the attributes. Now they go into the different racial breakdown or racial abilities and such. So all halfling characters, I'll spend some time on halflings here. All halfling characters have a high resistance to magic spells, so for every 3.5 points of constitution ability that the character possesses, he or she gains a +1 to saving throw versus wands, staves, rods, and spells. This converts to the following bonuses for constitution. A 4 to 6 gives it a gives the character a +1, a 7 to 10 a +2, an 11 to 13 a +3, a 14 to 17 a +4, and an 18 gives them a +5 to their saving throw versus various types of magic. As halflings also have a similar resistance to poison of all sorts, they gain a constitution bonus identical to that for saving throws versus magic. All halfling characters are able to speak the following languages in addition to mankind's common tongue and the alignment language. Certain halfling characters have infravision. Those with mixed blood are assumed to have infravision, which functions up to 30 feet distance, while those of pure stoutish blood are able to see heat radiation variation up to 60 feet of normal infravision. Similar halflings of mixed type and those of pure stoutish blood are able to note if a passage is up to or down a grade of 75 degrees, a percent I should say, a D4, 1 to 3 on a D4 of the time. If alone, as well in advance, 90 feet or more of a party which does not consist entirely of halflings or elves, not in metal armor, and not in metal armor, halfling characters are able to move very silently. Thus, if they do not have to open some form of door or other screen, they will surprise a monster 66 2/3% of the time, a D4 on a D6, a 1 to 4 on a D6 of the time. If the door must be open, then the chance drops to 33% or at 1 to 2 on a D6. Halfling characters must accept the penalty of -1 to their initially generated strength ability scores, and they gain a bonus of +1 to their dexterity. So you can see that races have both advantages and disadvantages combined in order to create a certain amount of balance. They go into racial preferences here, how the various races get along with one another, or not at all in some cases, like an absolute hatred for, and others are either neutral, good, or distrustful. The character classes, we get into different the hit die types for each. So fighters have a D10, clerics have a D8, and these are changes from Dungeons and Dragons. So there's a little bit more variation with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons that you did not have in Dungeons and Dragons. Various weapon types and what's available based on class. Then we go into the actual class descriptions now. So clerics and their spell use, druids, fighters. Now you can see fighters 2000 to go to 0 to 2000 is level 1. At 2001 they become level 2. But you'll see here, clerics, same thing here. That's druid. Clerics move up level faster. You could see that they go to at 1501. So a cleric will gain a level. So certain classes advance faster than others. And that's another balancing issue. It's actually more important to have a cleric that moves up faster level than a fighter in those cases. And so it's there's degrees of difficulty in raising certain character classes. As you can see, a paladin doesn't go up to second level until 2,751 experience points. A ranger, 2,251. A magic user, 2,501. So a magic user takes a little bit longer. Longer than a fighter, a lot longer than a cleric. Illusionist, longer than a magic user, 2,501. 22, no, illusionist, a little faster. And last but not least will be thieves at 1,251, which I believe was about the same as the cleric. Assassins 1501, so very quickly they go up in level. A monk 2251, so a little bit on the higher end, less than paladins, more than fighters, and a lot more than thieves. Equipment of characters, I mean, this is not anything very important as far as, this kind of equipment. Armor class in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is descending armor class. So the lower the number, the better your armor class is. And they go into the system of henchmen. So you have henchmen and those types of things in the Players Handbook. Here you have your list of spells. All right, all the way up to level 7 for clerics, level 9 for magic users, illusionists level 7, and then the whole section on spell explanation. Now I had a special request of going through some certain spells from Unearthed Arcana. So when I get to that book and do the review of that book, we'll I'll focus on those particular spells. But for the most part, spells are spells take up a lot of the book. You have several different spell casting classes, and so each one has, as I said, respectively 9 levels or 7 levels, respectively. So it takes a lot of room in the book. And let's see what we come across. As we're into illusion spells. So at the adventure, you have adventuring, you have encumbrance, which is a system that determines how much your characters can carry, and then what's the effects if they're lightly encumbered versus moderately or very encumbered. We go into ultravision and moving, silent movement, invisible movement, surprise, the whole system of traps, tricks, and encounters. And this is in the players section. Initiative and how to determine which side goes first. Communication, negotiation, spells, and combat, and such. It talk about the order of combat. First strike. The 1-minute melee round assumes much activity. Rushing, retreats. Yeah, that's the other thing that conceptually, it's not just, all right, you're just doing one attack during this. The 1-minute melee round, so it's considered to be 60 seconds of time. You're assumed to be doing many different things. I've also seen descriptions of like combat damage. Like, so if you're swinging your sword and your sword does D10 damage and you hit the person for 6 points of damage, that doesn't necessarily mean that all 6 of those hit points of damage came from just the sword. There's all kinds of things going on in that combat that combined created the 6 points of damage. So you might, yes, most of it's going to come from hitting them with the sword, but not all of that's coming from the blade. You might have also raked them with the hilt of the sword as you were struggling. You might have elbowed them during the course of that combat as well. You might have scuff their knee, as you're scrumming and fighting along with this thing. So it's not all just one thing happening during that 1 minute of time. There's feints, there's parries, and I'm just reading along here. There's rushes, there's retreats. A minute is a long time. So a lot of activities are taking place during that combat round. Morale comes into play. Morale is not something I like to use as a dungeon master. I like to believe that the characters or the player characters have their morale that their player decides. Only for NPCs or monsters that the player characters are fighting do I determine what their morale might be. I very rarely use morale checks. They go into poison, some really great art here. How to run successful, or how to be in a successful adventure. So this is, again, from the player's perspective. So having successful adventures, is what the players are really looking for. That's their goal. Psionics is optional. That's where we get into the appendix section of the book here, and we're almost done. This is still psionics. I never much messed around with psionics either. Bards is a subclass and an optional class here. Alignment. Alignment was made important in first edition, and it's one of those things that I believe Gary Gygax really believed in. But and this is a good representation of it, where you kind of get diabolical is over here, demonic is over here, beautiful is, on the chaotic good side, saintly is on the lawful good side, and then you have your neutral, down the center here, and lawful versus chaotic neutral and such. And so it's it was important. It was important, I believe, the way the system was working, and to have alignment be a true connection to deities back in this older version of the game. But I really do like domains, a little bit better. So having clerics align more with the domains of their deities than just the alignment of their deities. And I just always found it to be a better way of thinking about alignment and player characters, especially as they're, if they are characters that are attuned to a certain deity. And go into prime material existence and the different material planes and astral planes, and here are all the different planes. And this is just to give the players references to the world and the universe as it coexists, and then monetary systems and such for. And equipment charts and such. And so that's pretty much it. So let me switch views once more, and we're going to do the wrap up here. So as you can see, there's a lot of information in here. Some of it is described as being necessary for gameplay. Others are, obviously optional. Ultimately, the DM is the one who is going to decide, what parts to use, what parts to discard, what parts to change. And so it's it is a guideline. There are certain aspects of it that are kind of required, and those required parts are explained, so that and the fact that they're here in the Players Handbook, it's so that the players can read this ahead of time and kind of understand why these decisions were made and why they're important for the game. So wrapping up, this is why this is still so playable today, is that it has a very different approach to a role-playing game than in comparison to, 5th edition, let's say, and certainly in comparison to 4th edition. But it's a little bit crunchier, and for certain people, that's more appealing as well. And it has an emphasis on making choices. So there is definitely an emphasis to, well, if I'm playing this race, I want to play this class, and I want to play this race, and I want my character to be this gender, then all three of those things combine up for you to see, well, this is what the impact of those three choices are going to have ultimately on my character. Am I building my character to be optimal, or am I building my character to be a character that I envision playing for role-playing purposes? And so that's something that I think this system does very, very well, is it supports the idea of you making do with what you have, or making do with what your desire to play with, your decision to play a certain type of character is really supported by this system. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments, you want to point out, hey, I disagree, or hey, I really like the way that you did this. Any kind of comments I welcome, as long as they're positive and constructive. And once again, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments, leave your comments. If you hadn't subscribed, please consider subscribing. And make sure you hit that alert bell. In a couple days, I will go and start tearing apart the Dungeon Master's Guide in order. So I am going to be following this series in order as best I can. So Dungeon Master's Guide will be the next book in this series. And once again, thank you for joining. Stay safe out there. I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen sometime soon. And you have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care.